Didn't you say that?
Not yet.
You're already live. You're live already. Music.
Hello, good morning. And we're starting in a couple of minutes. Alrighty, we're gonna start in 5 minutes. It's 9:56. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're starting in 5 minutes. I hope this method works better than the Zoom. So it's just a test. Hopefully, we'll have other lectures that are different than this one. Maybe we'll keep on doing the lives. I'm not sure. We'll see how that works. Hello, good morning. If you would like to comment, just that you are in the lecture. Ms. Rivera is taking assistance. I'm sorry, attendance. Alrighty, and we'll start in a couple of minutes. One more minute. No, actually, 2 more minutes. Then we'll start. Okay, guys, so we're gonna start. Alrighty, we're gonna start. This is chapter 3, Ethics and Jurisprudence. Hopefully, you had an opportunity to view it before entering the lecture. I know I just posted it this morning, but maybe you could have browsed through it, perhaps read the chapter last night. And we're gonna go jump right in it because we don't have a lot of time and we want to cover the most as possible. Dental jurisprudence. What is dental jurisprudence? It's the application of principles of law as they relate to the practice of dentistry. Why is this important for us as dental assistants? Well, it's important for us to know what we are allowed to do and we are what we are not allowed to do in the dental practice. And the only way we can know is either by the dentist telling you what you're supposed to be doing, or also by reading your obligations in the dental jurisprudence if your doctor happens to have this book. These are the laws that govern dentistry: obligations of the practitioner to the patient, relations of the dentist to each other, relations with society. Now, dentists have to follow certain rules. For example, it says obligations of the practitioner to their patient. What is the obligation of the dentist to the patient? Well, to provide service. Do they have the right to deny service? Yes, they do have the right to deny service. A lot of people don't think that they do, but they do. Relations of dentists to each other. Now, there's a lot of practitioners that are general practitioners. There's specialists, and whenever, for example, let's say somebody, a general practitioner, refers the patient to a specialist, the specialist has to treat the patient and return it back to the general practitioner. That's the way it's supposed to be. Why? Because it's their moral codes, the codes of ethics. There's a law that protects the general practitioner, and they're supposed to work for everybody. So the general practitioner sees the patient, refers the patient to a specialist. The specialist has to treat the patient and return it back to the general practitioner. So that happens with regular medicine as well. When you go to the doctor and you tell them, let's say you went for a broken bone, and then you tell them, well, I have a rash on my skin, and they tell you, no, we can't treat that. They're actually true. They're not being mean or anything like that. They just have to treat whatever um, the circumstances at that moment. And if you need more care, you have to go back to your primary care physician, because that's the way it's supposed to be, because of laws that protect the dentists and the doctors and the relationships with each other. Now let's talk about, sorry, let me go back. So dental jurisprudence is the application of principles of law, and do not confuse it with forensic dentistry or odontology. It is not the same thing. Sometimes when you look it up online, it might seem like it's the same thing, but it's not. Forensic odontology is the application of dental knowledge to those criminal and civil laws that are enforced by police agencies in a criminal justice system. In other words, they help the justice system come up with with the proper handling of evidence, examinations, evaluations of dental evidence, which will be presented in the interest of justice. How is this? This is not in your book, but I just wanted to cover it just for your information. Forensic odontology. The forensic dentists, they're responsible for six main areas of practice: identification of human remains, identification in mass fatalities, assessment of bite mark injuries, assessment of abuse, child or spouse or elder. Number five, civil cases involving malpractice, and six, age estimation. Whenever there's a doubt in a criminal setting of identification of a person, they call the forensic odontologist, because they're able to identify human remains. In in the event of a mass fatality, let's say there was a bomb, a lot of people exploded. There's parts everywhere. They don't know how many people were there in a certain place. Who was it? Women, men, children. They call the forensic odontologist for identification in mass fatalities. The assessments of bite mark injuries. Now, there's a lot of criminals who like to bite their victims, and the only way they can be incriminated is by a forensic odontologist. But this used to be a method to actually determine if a person was guilty or not. But nowadays, it's not. It's just a supportive information to provide to the case. Because before, a long time ago, oh, not a long time ago, but like 70s, 80s, it used to be a determinant factor if the forensic odontologist said that the bite mark matched. Like in this case here, let me put my pointer. Like right here, that would match the models of the criminal to the bite, and if it matched, then the person was guilty. Now, it took them a lot of cases and a lot of error to know that our teeth are not what they were supposed to. They thought it was like a fingerprint, that everybody had different dentition. And they realized it wasn't true. Now, This type of evidence is important, but its supportive evidence is not. It doesn't determine whether or not the person committed the crime. Assessment of abuse, child abuse, spousal or elder, the same way with the bike registration. Civil cases involving malpractice. Let's say somebody is sued for malpractice and they're not sure. The lawyer's not sure. Calls up a forensic odontologist. They provide all the X-rays, all the file, and then determine whether or not it was malpractice or not. Age estimation in the case of human remains. Okay, let's move forward to ethics. What is ethics? And that is a question that it's on your discussion board. What is ethics? Well, ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with morality. Then my other question is, what is morality? Another thing, ethics is the branch of knowledge that deals with moral principles. Again, morality. What is morality? Morality. What is moral? What determines something to be moral or immoral? Think about it for a minute. Now, here you can see a whole bunch of books piled up. They're Bibles, different religions. So, what is moral? Moral is determined by location, culture, and religious beliefs. And it's very true. What we think might be immoral for somebody that lives somewhere else and has another culture and other beliefs might not think it's immoral. For example, let's talk about location. Let's say somebody is walking downtown here in El Paso in a thong, and all of a sudden they get stopped by the police, they get arrested for indecent exposure, and they're taken to jail. But then put the same person with that thong at Miami Beach. Would that person be arrested? No. Would that be more? No. Why? Because it's determined by location. Right here, location. Now let's talk about culture and religious beliefs. A lot of what we think it's right and wrong, it depends a lot in our culture and religious beliefs. Now, the Mexican culture is very conservative, and their religious beliefs are very Catholic. So it might be different than someone who grew up here in the United States all the time and has a different way of seeing things, or someone that grew up in the other side of the world. For example, let's think about child marriages. On the other side of the world, it's determined to be right. There's nothing wrong with it, but here in the United States, it's completely wrong and immoral. Why? Because that's the way we view things. So, morality is determined by location, culture, and religious beliefs. So, if morality it's a branch of philosophy that deals with, if ethics is a branch of philosophy that deals with morality, does everybody have the same ethics as we do? Probably not. Everybody's different. So, with this in mind, there's always a code of conduct and rules that we have to follow because if we leave it in our mentality and how we were brought up and how we think something is right or wrong, then it will be different for everybody. So, in the workplace, for example, there has to be rules to be followed and things that tell you that you're doing the right thing and you're not doing the right thing because then everybody thinks differently. Ethics is based on a well founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do, usually in the terms of rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues in accordance with the rules of standards. So, my question is, and I believe it's also in your discussion board, is being moral the same as being ethical? Can you be moral and unethical at the same time? Or is it together? It's something that I want you to think about. In reality, it's not the same thing. It might seem like the same thing, but it's not the same thing. Now let's talk about another thing, the law. The system is a system of rules that a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and may be enforced by the imposition of penalties. The law. We all know them. Sometimes some people have broken the law and suffered for it. But I believe that if we didn't have a law system, this world would be a chaos. And I don't know if everybody will behave. So sometimes those rules help us maintain ourselves in society with good relationships with everybody in society. And sometimes people break the law. The law is blind. Since the 15th century, Lady Justice has often been depicted wearing a blindfold. The blindfold represents objectivity, and the justice is or should be metered, objectively without fear or favor, regardless of identity, money, power, or weakness. Blind justice and impartiality. Sometimes we believe that the law is way too blind. Sometimes they just see the facts and things that determine whether or not you're right or somebody is wrong could go further than just the facts. But the law only sees the facts. That's why blind justice is blind and impartial. Now let's talk about statutory law. The law that is written and enacted by a legislative body. And for example, there's a law established. And let's talk about speeding because everybody speeds sometimes. So there's a law that says that that you shouldn't speed or that you should be driving at a certain distance, miles per hour. Now, if you break it, you're speeding, and of course, you have your police that stops you. This whole process is called statutory law because the law is written and enacted by a legislative body to make sure that you're following the law. Okay. Now let's talk about civil and criminal law. The law is divided into two primary classifications: civil law concerned with private relations between members of a community; criminal law, body of law that regulates crime. It proscribes conduct perceived as threatening or harmful. In dentistry, whenever the law is broken, it goes under civil law. Okay, but if it goes beyond that, let's say it's an actual criminal law, a criminal act like murder, then it will go into criminal law. But any other things like malpractice or something that the patient is not comfortable with that decided to sue the doctor goes under civil law. The most frequent law exercised in a dental care setting is civil law. The defendant was charged or brought against, which is the dentist, and the plaintiff who is bringing in the charges is the patient. Dental Practice Act. And if you notice, I don't know if you guys have your book with you, but I'm going in order as how your book is. Okay. The Dental Practice Act describes the legal restrictions of dental professionals by state. Each state has different descriptions of the Dental Practice Act. That's why when you decide to move out of state and start practicing, you have to abide by the rules of that state. For Texas, I uploaded it on Blackboard, is the Dental Practice Act, so you can review it, see it, so you can know what we are allowed and not allowed to do. A state board of dentistry has the responsibility of enforcing adherence to the Dental Practice Act. And the Dental Practice Act describes exactly what everybody should be doing in the dental world, what the dentist is allowed to do and what the dentist is not allowed to do. For example, there's dentists are considered doctors, but can a dentist remove an ingrown toenail? No. I mean, they probably can because they know they're doctors, but according to the Dental Practice Act, that is something that they are not supposed to be doing. So the Dental Practice Act gives you the legal restrictions of what you can and cannot do. Same applies to us, dental assistants. The Dental Assistant Practice Act, Texas, is Chapter 265, and I also uploaded it in Blackboard so you can read it and go over it. Alrighty. State Board of Dentistry. This board has the basic responsibility of enforcing adherence to the Dental Practice Act. So we have the Dental Practice Act that tells us what we should be doing in the dental world, and the state board has the responsibility of enforcing it. The state board comes and checks up on dentists whenever there's a suspicion of the rules or the laws not being followed, and they are the ones who actually prosecute. The members of this board are appointed by the state governor. So every time there's a new election, there's a new board member at the there's a new board member in the dentistry board. So you cannot apply for this job. The governor has to appoint you. The dental assistant and hygienist are appointed to participate in discussion but are non-voting members. So the only voting members in this in the state board is the dentist. That's it. They examine applicants for dental licenses and grant licenses. Guys, when you're going to start applying for your license, you're going to be turning in a application along with all the papers that they ask, and they determine whether or not you're eligible to have a license or not. And I don't know, when you started this program, they told you that you were going to have an extra background check. So if you have anything in your background check that may um, interfere with what they believe is something that they want in their board, then they might not grant you the license. All right. License to practice. The license is to protect the public from unqualified individuals providing dental treatment. Whenever you go to the dentist, you walk in and you see all these different licenses hanging on the wall. By law, they're supposed to be hanging there, showing the patient that everybody there at that practice has a license to practice, so they can feel secure. Okay, it's to protect the public from unqualified individuals providing treatment. Texas requires for dentists, hygienists, and dental assistants to be licensed. Not all states require this. For example, if you go to Arizona, Arizona does not require for a dental assistant to have a license. It's kind of like in the job training. And every state is different. I don't know all the states, but at least I do know Arizona because PIMA's main campus is in Arizona. But not all states require for dental assistants to be licensed. To obtain the license, you must one, meet educational and moral requirements. Again, we have it here. Moral requirements. How do they determine that? By doing the background check. If you have anything that has any crimes related to drugs, drug possession, distribution, or anything like that, then they might deny you your license. If there's family violence, also, any charge of family violence will also um, decline your application for licensure. But of course, it's determined by the board. So everything is, you can turn in all your paperwork, and then they look at your case, and it's different it's by case. So don't think that if you have something that you did in the past and it's already been more than 5 years that it's going to affect you. It might, but it might not. It just depends on what the board decides. You have to pass a written exam and clinical exam and a background check, medical and federal. Medical, why? Both just want to know that you have not had any trouble in any other medical field. Because sometimes people decide to change careers because they did something in another medical career. So they want to make sure that you're good to go. This is what the license looks like. This is the dentist license up here, and this is dental assistant's license. This is something that you'll be receiving and hanging on a wall when you finish this program. So, what will determine your suspension or revoked license? Felonies, of course, or convictions. Misdemeanors of drug addiction, moral corruption, federal crimes, and incompetence, such as physical disability or mental disability. For example, let's say you're already a dental assistant and you commit a felony, then, like, for example, one that is very common is uh, driving while intoxicated, DWI. Some people go to parties, all of a sudden they decide to drive back home in the while intoxicated. Well, that is a big felony. So that will definitely make your license be revoked. Misdemeanors of drug addiction and moral corruption, federal crimes, any type of federal crime, like the most common one would be fraud. Incompetence, of course, if you have a physical disability, you don't have any hands, perhaps, or something happened to you physically, then that enables you from practicing, then they'll revoke your license. Mental disability, of course, if you're not mentally.
prepared to be a dental assistant. Expanded functions. Dental assistants are delegated these duties by the dentist in accordance to the state's Dental Practice Act. In Texas, we don't have expanded functions anymore. This applies to other states. There's some states that do, like New Mexico has expanded functions, and it's a extra certification that you get to do extra things. But if you go to your Blackboard, I also uploaded allowable and non-allowable duties in Texas. You'll see the long list of what you are supposed to do as a dental assistant, and for the expanded functions here in Texas, the doctor has to allow it. For example, bleaching. Um, the bleaching treatment, for example. It's not on there saying that you can't do it, but it doesn't say that you can do it either. It will be at the doctor's discretion. These functions go under doctrine of respondent superior. In other words, let the master answer. For example, let's say they send you and you took a course on bleaching and you have your certification that says that you are able to place bleaching treatment on a patient because you already know how. It does the Dental Practice Act doesn't say that you can or cannot do. It will be under the doctor's discretion. So in this case, it will go under the doctrine of respondent superior. He will respond for you. Okay. These assistants are advised to have their own malpractice insurance, and the ADA has coverage of the ADAA has a coverage of $50,000 for malpractice insurance. Going over and expanded functions, there's a term called general supervision, and you'll see it on that document that I uploaded on what you are allowed and not allowed to do in the state of Texas for the year 2019. The year 2020 has not come out yet due to all the circumstances that had happened, but we're following 2019's rules. And the reason I mentioned the year is because every year those rules change. So one year you might be allowed to do something, and then the next year you're not. It just depends on what the board decides, and it changes every year. But for this year, 2020, we're still following 2019's rules. Um, there's certain functions that you can do under general supervision, which means the dentist is to diagnose and authorize the work to be performed by the dental assistant, and the dentist is not required to be on the premises. There's some functions there, if you want to go over that document that I sent you, that you're allowed to do without the doctor being there right next to you or in the building. Then we have direct supervision. Dentists must be physically in the treatment facility to be available for immediate patient care needs and must evaluate performance of procedure. There's some procedures like, for example, the bleaching that I was just talking about. Um, that will be under direct supervision. The dentist must be in the facility. It doesn't mean that he has to be breathing down your neck, but definitely being in the facility to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Because he's responding for you under the doctrine of respondent superior, so he has to be there in the building. All right, let's move forward with the dentist, the dental assistants, and the law. What is a contract? I'm sure you heard it. I'm sure you've had contracts in the past with your landlords or whatever. It's a binding agreement between two or more people. It's an agreement. And then there's the express contract, written or verbally agreed upon. An implied contract implemented by actions, not words. When you go to the dentist, you don't actually sign a contract that you are going to be treated by a dentist. It's just expressed verbally. You go there, you fill out the information. They give you a certain paperwork where you are putting all your personal information, and you're allowing the doctor to even get records from previous dentists. So it's not an actual contract, but you give him permission for that dentist to bring over all your records. So it's like a written agreed upon contract. It's an express contract. An implied contract also in dentistry is when you're sitting down in a dental chair and your actions determine whether or not you want to be seen. um, the patient is sitting, you open your mouth, you're implying that you want to be treated, so it's an implied contract. So in dentistry, we have both the express contract and the implied contract. In the express, this is written or verbally. Written means merely filling out those paperworks and the consent forms. Termination of contract. Until the contract is broken, the dentist is legally bound to treat the patient. It can be determined if it can be terminated if the patient leaves the dentist, patient fails to follow instructions given by the dentist, dentist formally withdraws from patient care. The patient no longer needs treatment. Okay, termination of contract. Like I mentioned, it's not an actual contract that you made. It's mainly a consent form and the implied contract. So when does it end? It ends when the patient leaves the dentist. So if the patient decides to leave the dentist cannot sue him for breaking the contract. Right? It doesn't happen like that. Just the patient leaves, goes somewhere else. Okay, then there was a termination of that contract. Patient fails to follow instructions given by the dentist. Sometimes some patients don't follow directions. You tell them after an extraction, please be careful. Don't be eating anything that has grease, or anything that has any irritant, or don't drink alcohol, or don't drink soda pop because the gas will go into the socket and give you all this trouble. Patient doesn't follow instructions, goes home, has a steak with a Coke, and comes back with a big infection. And you gave them instructions what to do. They did not follow it. The doctor gives them treatment for whatever infections they caught, and again happens again, and it keeps happening over and over. Then the doctor can say, I withdraw from being your dentist because you're not following directions, and they have the right to do that. They can. The patient cannot turn around and say, I'm going to sue you because you are not treating me, and you're leaving me and whatever. No, the dentist has the right to formally withdraw from a patient care. And another way of terminating a contract is when the patient no longer needs the treatment. When did this happen? When a general practitioner refers a patient to a maxillofacial surgeon for wisdom tooth removal. They finish with the wisdom tooth removal at the maxillofacial office, determine the contract has ended, and they send them back to the general practitioner. The general practitioner sends another patient to the orthodontist. Whenever they finish the orthodontic treatment, that is a termination of contract, then the patient hopefully is returned back to the general practitioner. Okay, let's move forward with standard of care. What is standard of care? The dentist and dental team has a responsibility to perform due care in treating all patients. And what is due care? Due care, what any reasonable and prudent dental care professional in the same circumstances would do. When you go to the dentist, and I don't know if you've been to the dentist or to several dentists, they all have the same protocol. They greet you, you go back to the dental chair, they go over your medical dental records, they take your vital signs, they talk to you about if you know what the treatment's all about, they give you consent forms, they make an observation, they write down all whatever they see. That is something that they always do at every single dental practice. So that is due care. What any reasonable and prudent dental care professional in the same circumstances would do, because it should be the same care at every single dental practice. Okay. Now let's talk about the scope of practice. The scope of practice is designed to reflect which procedures can be done safely and effectively based on the education and training of the person doing it with the goal of protecting the patient. Dental assistants, hygienists, and dentists can be held legally responsible for performing procedures that are not they are not educated, trained, or licensed to do. Okay, the Dental Practice Act tells you exactly what you're supposed to be doing, and that is your scope of practice. If you were trained only to do that long list that I provided for you guys, and you go out of that list without the authorization of your dentist under respondent superior, then you're going out of the scope of practice and you can be legally responsible for that. This is designed just to protect the patient because if you're doing something that you were not trained or educated to do, then you are bound to mess up or do something wrong. So the scope of practice is designed to protect your patient and is based on the education and training of the person doing it. Like I mentioned earlier, if a dentist could remove an ingrown toenail, I'm sure they can, but they're not supposed to. Why? Because they didn't go to school for that education, and their training was not on that. Even though they might know how to do it, they shouldn't be doing it because then they go out of their scope of practice. That's why when you go to a specialist, they don't go out of their scope of practice. Yes, they became general doctors first, and then they became specialists. But once you become a specialist, you are no longer treating general practitioners, you know, conditions, even though you were trained for it. Because once you have your specialty, you're supposed to stick to your specialty because that is your scope of practice now. For dental assistants, the list is there. If you go out of it, then it has to be under the doctrine of respondent superior. But if it doesn't go under the doctrine of respondent superior because it's something so crazy like making an extraction. I know I had a student come in once and said, Doctor, I was at this dental office and one of the assistants made the extraction. And I said, Oh, really? And she said, Yeah. Well, that's definitely going out of the scope of practice, and that dental assistant could be liable, legally responsible for that, for performing such a procedure. Okay. Now let's go to malpractice. Malpractice, improper, illegal, or negligent professional activity or treatment, especially by a medical practitioner, lawyer, or public official. Malpractice only applies to lawyers or public officials or medical practitioners. It doesn't apply to your hairstylist. If your hairstylist did something wrong, you cannot sue them for malpractice because it does not apply for them. This law only applies for medical, lawyers, and public officials where they improperly or illegally or negligently professional activity or treatment. So, what is negligence? Failure to exercise the standard of care. We already know what the standard of care is. The standard of care is what anybody would do at the same circumstances in a dental practice. That a reasonable person would exercise it in a similar circumstance. What indicates negligence? Standard of care was not met by the dentist or by the dental assistant. Act in question resulted in injury to the patient. Now, here, how can we fall into negligence without even thinking about it? It could happen. It could happen to all of us. We're busy. Let's say you have like 4 dental units, you have 4 patients, and you have a certain time frame to finish all your patients. As soon as you finish one patient, you're supposed to clean up and sit the next one. With this in mind, and then you know that you have a tight schedule, and of course, production is always one of the things that you'll be encountered with when you go out to the dental field. There's certain productivity you're supposed to do during the day, and by the end of the week, they measure your productivity and such. So it's a busy day. You have 4 dental units, you have patients, you had an extraction, and several fillings. You take care of the other patients, you get them out. When you get to the extraction, the doctor tells you, okay, I'm done. Let's see the next patient. You sit them up, you start asking them questions if they feel okay, and you kind of give them instructions on how to care, and then you just send them on their way. One of the things is the post op for extractions has to be done verbally and written. Why? Because the patient had just had an extraction. They're probably not listening to you. They're just saying yes, just to get it over with. But they're not listening to what you're saying. But it's important that you tell them what they can and cannot eat and give it to them in writing. So let's say you did talk to your patient, but you forgot to give them the written indications and you send them on their way. You didn't mean to forget, you just forgot because it was such a busy day. But this falls under negligence from your part. And could it result in an injury of the patient? Yes. It could result in an injury of the patient. Why? Because even though you said it verbally, you forgot to comply with it written. And it's something that it has to be all the time verbal and written. Verbal and written. Why? Because people forget what you tell them. You'll see it when you start seeing your patients. You start telling them what to do, and then they say yes, they're nodding, and then you ask them, "Can you tell me what I told you? What you're going to be doing?" And they can't because they weren't listening to you. But sometimes you don't have time to go over it verbally, so you and until they get it, so you can just say it verbally, and then you give them to them written, and then they sign for it. That way, you gave them the instructions. and that, you know, covers you in the way that you actually did what you were supposed to be doing. Because if you forget one portion of that, then it falls into negligence, and if that patient has injury, they can come back and, sue you. If a patient fails to follow directions, it is not negligence. No, why? Because you told them what to do. You give them oral and written information on what to do, and they still didn't follow it. That is not negligence. They just didn't follow your directions. For elements to negligence, it has to be duty, derelict, direct cause, and damage. Those are the elements that determine negligence. Okay, okay, torts. What is a tort? An act or omission that gives rise to injury or harm to another and amounts at a civil wrong for which court imposes a liability. In the context of torts, injury describes the invasion of any legal right, whereas harm describes the loss of determinant in fact an individual suffers. Uh, Act or omission. That's very interesting because you could do something that causes harm to a patient, like going out of your scope of practice. When you go out of your scope of practice because you want to supposedly help your patient, that is a tort. Why? Because you are going out of your scope of practice. You're acting something that is going to result in injury and cause harm. In omission, what is omission? Well, omission is not doing something. So I remember the first time I heard this, it was very interesting because I'm not Catholic, but I did go to a Catholic church with my husband once, and they were praying for forgiveness of acts or omissions. And I thought it was just so interesting that you ask for forgiveness for something you didn't do. But now I get it because sometimes not doing something can result into harm. So if you omit something, if you skip steps, will result in harm or injury, and that will be determined into a tort, and you could be legally liable for that. Let's talk about medical torts. Medical tort treatment without consent amounts to assault and battery. Consent forms, super important, guys. I'm sure you've seen it when I don't know if you ever been to the emergency room. Somebody's dying, and then they barely can talk or write, and there's like a nurse running behind them and asking them to sign papers, and you're probably thinking, man, this lady, they can pay for it later. Well, it's not the payment that they want. They want a consent form to treat that patient. And consent forms are very important because if you don't have that consent form, then you are liable for assault and battery in the medical field. So its treatment cannot be continued against the wish of the patient. In case of an unconscious patient, then the guardian or person responsible should consult the doctor and sign all the paperwork. But paperwork needs to be signed. Consent forms need to be signed before treatment of any kind, before you even touch your patient. Why? Because then it will amount into assault and battery in the medical field. Assault. Threat of touching a person without a consent. Battery, the actual touching. Two different torts. Assault and battery in medicine treatment administered without the patient's consent. Let's say that the patient did want the treatment, but you just forgot to give him the consent form because it happens. It could just, nothing could happen, and you could just ask your patient to sign it later. But what if they know about this? That you did not give them the consent form, they don't tell you anything, you don't say anything, and they sue you for this because they can and they know how. So be careful, guys. Always your consent forms because touching a person without their consent is assault, and the actual touching is battery. For example, when you're going to take the vital signs on your patient, you've walked into the back, you sit him down, you went over the medical records. Now it's time to take the vital signs. It's important that you tell them you're going to touch them. You're going to say, "Oh, can I touch your arm because I'm going to take your blood pressure?" Or "Can I touch you?" Because if you touch them without their consent, um, you could be liable for that. So it's important that you let them know or ask them if you can touch them to take their vital signs. Defamation of character. When someone makes a false statement that causes some type of harm, the statement must be published, meaning some third party must have heard it. False, it must result in harm, usually to the reputation. That is defamation of character, and I'm sure you've seen it in Facebook and YouTube, all these social media. Sometimes people talk bad about each other, and that's, of course, if it's false, then it's defamation of character. We have what is called a libel. It's a published false statement that is damaging to a person's reputation, a written defamation. Sometimes patients get upset and they write things on the doctor's page. Those things can never be erased in the internet. I mean, you could just erase it, but somebody took a screenshot and it's never erased. So we have to be very careful what we publish. If it's a liable and it damages somebody's reputation, then we're definitely liable legally for that. Defamation of character also it's slander, the action or crime of making a false spoken statement damaging to someone's reputation. And guys, when you start working, you'll see that there's a lot of slander sometimes in the dental world. And you got to be careful because within that slander, you could include patients, and that is when you have trouble, when you start talking about other patients or private records of your patients with your coworkers. Okay. Let's go with invasion of privacy. Invasion of privacy is a tort or action when someone unlawfully intrudes into his or her private affairs, discloses his or her private information, publicizes him, her in a false light, or appropriates his or her name for personal gain. We have access to a lot of personal records because our patients trust us, and we have to maintain that trust. Whatever you read about your patient, it has to be private, and you have to keep it within that unit, that dental unit. It cannot go out. And I know it sounds like, oh, of course, yeah, we're going to do that. But sometimes when people get too comfortable in a dental practice and everybody's friends and people tend to forget about this, excuse me, because a patient could walk in and, they could have, I don't know, a lot of surgeries. And then they say, wow, does that person have surgery or not? Because it looks like she has breast implants. And you could say, well, yeah, she does. I read it in her medical record. No, you can't say that. You can't participate in things like that when you talk about other private affairs of your patients. So you got to be careful. So let's talk about dental fraud. Any act of intentional deception or misinterpretation or treatment, facts made for the purpose of gaining unauthorized benefits. Dental fraud could happen very easily, guys, and the misinterpretation of services when you are charting. Very easy, for example, with the surgeries. We have completely bony surgeries. We have surgical extractions and your regular extraction. All of those have different codes. They are very similar to one another because they all involve an extraction of a tooth, but the way it is extracted, that's what makes the code different. Thus, the price is different. So when you're charting, it's important that you chart correctly because you don't want to fall into dental fraud where you are misinterpreting the services. So it's important that you, when you're writing down your medical record, sorry, your dental record, that you are sure. And if you're not sure, ask what kind of treatment it was because the prices change. Let's say you know it was an extract, it was supposed to be a regular extraction, and then it became a surgical extraction, and you're not sure. Always ask because let's say you charge, well, for the surgical extraction, and the doctor said no, it wasn't. It was just a regular extraction. Then you just charge the patient too much money, and that could get you in trouble because it's a misinterpretation of services. Oh, alrighty. Unbundling services charges a lot of practices bundle services such as X-rays, cleaning, and things like that, and they charge one big amount for it. Well, they're not supposed to. It's unbundling of services and charges. Um, Good Samaritan law provides basic legal protection for those who assist a person who is injured or in danger. In essence, these laws protect the Good Samaritan from liability if unintended consequences result from their assistance. Here in Texas, we do have a law that protects. In Texas, we have the Good Samaritan Act, and it protects the health practitioner. Why? Because you're providing service with the intent of doing good, and sometimes people get injured. And in that effect, they could be uh, they could be sued. But in Texas, we have something that is the Good Samaritan Act that protects the medical practitioner. Um, this is in your book as well. Child Abuse or Neglect Captain is the Abuse Prevention Treatment Act was established in all 50 states in 1996. The dental assistants fall under this reporting law. Failure to report suspected child abuse and neglect can result uh, or criminal liability punishable by the law. If you happen to have a suspicion that there's child abuse with one of your patients, it's important that you bring it up to the doctor. Why? You're not going to be thrown in jail because you accuse somebody falsely. You're not. But you could save somebody's life. So you're a dental professional, you're a medical dental professional, and reporting this is important. Otherwise, the law will prosecute you if they happen to know that that patient went to the dental to get dental treatment and nobody reported it. So it's important to report it because it's punishable by the law not to. Okay, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act was established in 1990. Basically, all dental offices must have ramps for accessibility for wheelchairs, doorways that are wide, rooms should allow for care to be provided for the disabled. One dental operator needs to have access for patients on wheelchairs. Now, when you start working, you might notice that some offices don't have one, but it might seem that they don't. But they can also leave one of the bigger dental units for this type of patient. So always ask where the disabilities unit is for your patients. Also, another thing, guys, whenever you have a patient that's on a wheelchair, never attempt to lift the patient from that chair into the dental chair if you are not trained to do so. I don't know if you ever tried moving someone that is on a wheelchair, they are very heavy. And if you're not trained to do it, you can get hurt very seriously. You could hurt your back. Okay. So always, usually these patients come with a family member, or they could ask, or sometimes they can move by themselves because they're very strong. Their arms get really strong. Sometimes they're able to transport themselves from the dental chair to their wheelchair and from the wheelchair to the dental chair without any assistance. So be careful with that. Dental records. That is our responsibility as a dental assistant. We are responsible to maintain accurate, up to date records, whether it's manual or electronic. Ink corrections. Whenever you make a correction in one of these records manual, you have to cross it out just with a little line and initial. Sort of like when you're writing a check and you messed up on a date or on something. You just kind of cross it. You don't make a hole in the paper. You don't make this big scribble on it. It's just a simple line going across it and initialing it. That should be okay with your medical records. Okay, again, informed consent. Super important, guys. The patient is informed in words that can be understood of the procedure, risks, expected outcome, and methods. In a surgical procedure, patient receives a consent form to sign and dental assistant signs as a witness. Not only in a surgical procedures, all procedures, there is a general procedure consent form that you're supposed to give your patient. Even if it's just a filling or a sealant, something simple, the patient has to sign consent and you have to explain the treatment to your patient in a way that they can easily understand. You're not going to go into technical words with them. You need to explain it in a very simple way so they can know what you're talking about and they either can agree or not agree to the treatment. And again, we have the implied consent. This may happen when a dentist sits down and patient opens his or her mouth. Patient is implying consent to examine or begin treatment. Subpoenas. Subpoenas is a court of order to compel testimony by a witness or production of evidence under a penalty for failure. Dental records can be subpoenaed. If you're up front and all of a sudden somebody comes in and tells you that they need a medical record because they're being subpoenaed, it's important that you let your doctor know because you cannot just turn medical records over to anyone. It's important that you let your dentist know, and if he agrees to it, great. But it's not you're not authorized to give those um, records unless authorized. And I'm just going over really quick, guys, because we're running out of time. Statute of limitations defines the period of time in which a legal action can take place. Usually, here, for example, they're talking about lawsuits within the dental practice. You have a time frame, a certain time frame to complain about something. Let's say you had an extraction and you feel that uh, they didn't do it right. They left something in there. Well, you have a limitation of time to when you can complain. You cannot come back, I don't know, 5 years later and say, hey, something happened to me that time. Most time frames run from 3 to 6 years, but it depends on the treatment. Okay, that is the statute of limitations. Diagnosis. In order for a dentist to make a correct diagnosis, they need, of course, review medical history, continue with a throughout evaluation, and create a treatment plan. This is to make a dental diagnosis. Are you, as a dental assistant, allowed to make a diagnosis? No, you're not. So you can help your doctor by observing and writing down your observation, but that is not a dental diagnosis. Professional dental ethics. Back in the old days, advertising was not illegal, but it used to be thought as unethical. Now we see advertisements everywhere, and things have really changed from the past. Professional fees, professional responsibilities. Your professional fees are determined a lot by the CDT codes, and we'll go into that. Professional responsibilities are you cannot refuse treatment on the basis of race, color, religion, national or origin, sexual preference, or HIV infected patient. Everybody has to be treated the same. And I know some students have asked me, "Oh, doctor, how do you feel when you treat someone that has HIV?" So I will the same because you follow the same protocol because everybody is potentially infectious, so you need to follow the same exact protocol with everyone, and it shouldn't be a difference. Principles of dental ethics. First of all, beneficence, to be good, do no harm, autonomy, justice, truthfulness, and confidentiality. Guys, I uploaded a more detailed dental ethics for dental assistants in Texas in Blackboard, so you guys can just look at it because we don't have time to go over it right now. CDT codes. These are transaction codes as they were created to achieve uniformity, consistency, and accurately documenting dental treatments. Whenever you start documenting things in your dental records, if it wasn't for the CDT codes, there wouldn't be uniformity of what you're charging the insurance or consistency. So these codes were created to have uniformity and consistency in the details to be the same from one practice to another. Okay, so you can exchange records and everybody's on the same page. Uh, the CD code is to provide for the efficient processing of dental claims, and another is to populate electronic health records. Nowadays, everything's electronic and it needs a special code. These codes they change every 2 years, and we have different books of codes every year. Of course, the basic codes never change, but new codes get added for new treatments. And for now, with the COVID-19, the medical professionals have new codes. Okay, and we'll have new codes as well. These codes go on this portion right here. This is the claim, the claim for insurance. They go right here, and it gives the description. You can write it over here, but the code will always be here. And when it's entered in their system, it's by codes, and of course, it stays in their record and also determines how much the dentist is being paid. Then we have HIPAA, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, sets the standard for protecting sensitive patient data. Any company that deals with PHI, which is personal health information, must ensure that all of the required physical network and process security measures are in place and followed. Uh, Before you go out into externship, you'll be taking a course on HIPAA, how to protect your patient's medical dental records. And if you don't have that certification, you can't start working because then you don't know how to handle records. So it's one of the things that you'll be taking later on is how to take care of your dental records. And I don't go much into detail right now because we'll have a class specifically on this. HIPAA and dental practice, according to the American Dental Association, dentists and their staff will be most familiar with the HIPAA privacy rule. HIPAA privacy rule gives patients certain rights over their health information, including dental records and billing records. Uh, I think we have mentioned this before. For the students that were with me in radiology, the owner of the medical records, X-rays, and images is the dentist. Of course, the doctor can allow the patient to have a copy of all these records, but the owner of all this information is the dentist. Okay, what does HIPAA encompass? Well, all these privacy standards that are covered, I'm not going to go over them right now, but I do need you to read them. Who must comply with HIPAA? Of course, who? Hospitals, clinics, nursing homes, assisted living homes, physicians, dentists, alternative medicine, everybody that has personal health information in their hands must comply with a HIPAA. Oops. Daily schedule sheets. Whenever you start working, you'll have schedules that look like this. And these schedules have a description of the treatment and the name of the patient. And that is sensitive information. It shouldn't be out and about because people are nosy and people tend to read things that they're not supposed to. And if you leave it lying around, even though it's just a schedule, you are exposing the patient's medical record. So you have to keep them inside cabinets. Computerized schedule must be exited or minimized before seeing another patient. It could happen. You are sitting patients really fast. You left the medical record open on the computer. You have your next patient coming in and sitting down. They look over and they just started reading somebody else's medical record. So you have to be careful whenever you are um, exiting your patient. Minimize or exit their record as well. Or if it's a manual record, make sure you close it and take it with you. You gotta protect the personal information of your patient. Okay, 5 steps towards HIPAA compliance. Of course, determine security requirements, identify data, think about how data could be leaked or lost, implement secure communication practices, and educate your staff on security policies. And there's more information on the American Dental Association.org page. Okay, in the dental practice, there's always someone who is called a privacy officer. It could be you guys as dental assistants, or it could be the manager or someone appointed, where they are keeping an eye on everybody to make sure that the policies are being followed when it comes to dental records. Privacy notice should be described how the health information is going to be used and disclosed. Is something that you need to tell your patient or you need to provide them with that information. How are you going to use that information and how are you going to disclose it, especially if you're referring a patient? If you refer a patient from a general practice to orthodontics, they have to sign that privacy note that describes how your information is going to be shared. Procedures if patients feel the rights they have been violated. All of this should be on a binder close by the manager's office where they know how to handle all these different difficult situations. The dentist PO are responsible for ensuring that the privacy procedures are adopted and followed. Employees must be trained to follow privacy policies. Health patient information, health and disclosure. I just mentioned they need to sign a consent form when you're going to be sending that patient to a specialist. How is that private information going to be used? Because sometimes it gets leaked. A lot of people say, "Oh, what do they want my information for?" It just says that I'm sick of diabetes. Yeah, but there's some people who want to take advantage of that and get that information and start bombarding you with uh, diabetic socks or diabetic things, and all of a sudden that person who just found out was a diabetic now has all this mail in their house or in their email about diabetics. Why? Because the information got leaked. You want to avoid that. Patient rights. Patients have the right to ask for a change in their records, ask healthcare provider not to disclose their information. Uh, I'm sure we've seen this. I know for sure I experienced this where mm, I was making an appointment for my husband and they didn't want to give me any information because uh, I was not allowed to there. So your healthcare provider can keep and not disclose the information to even your family. Ask a healthcare provider to communicate with them confidentially at an alternative location or by an alternative means. The healthcare provider must accommodate reasonable requests. Of course, you can ask your doctor to communicate with you in a confidential way in an alternative location, but it has to be a reasonable place. It's not going to be in the middle of the night in some parking lot somewhere out there. So it has to be reasonable. Security rules. Safeguards the control to access personal health information. This, guys, I do want you to go over it on your own. I'm just going to go over it really quick because we don't have a lot of time. The office has to have a manual where they have the privacy officer, job descriptions, HIPAA training, plan and dates, business audits, and HIPAA forms, HIPAA compliance evaluations, reports for violations, confidentiality agreements, and notices of policy changes. All of this has to be in your office manual. Staff training review, enforcement of HIPAA with an assigned officer. Preemption doctrine, and whenever the state laws are contrary to the federal law is to be followed first. Okay. However, if the state law provides greater privacy than the federal, then the state law must be followed. The important thing here is to maintain the, the patient's privacy and their information private. Federal civil and criminal penalties for patients' rights violations. Made of error with no intent, it's $100 per incident, up to 250,000 per year per standard. Knowingly violating a patient's rights to privacy are as follows: up to 100,000 and 5 years of imprisonment. So, guys, be very careful with the information that you have in your hands, because you'll definitely go to prison if you did it, of course, knowingly. Dental assistance following ethics and jurisprudence. It is necessary to stay abreast of the changes in the law. That's why I was telling you guys about that document I uploaded of 2019. Every year it changes of what you're allowed and not allowed to do in Texas. So it's your responsibility to look it up every year. It's not the dentist's responsibility, it's your responsibility because it relates to you and your Dental Practice Act. So, you need to review that. The doctor's not going to give you an update on that. The DA should strive to stay within the law, handle patients professionally, maintain a high standard of care, preserve confidentiality, obtain patients' consents, maintain legible and accurate records. There's another list of your dental assistant ethics in Texas. I want you to go over it and also participate on that discussion board. And this comes to an end, guys. Thank you very much. This is recorded and it's going to stay here recorded for you guys to view later. If you have any questions, please email me. And don't forget to participate in your discussion board today. Thank you very much. See you later.